The arrivals hall at Dallas-Fort Worth was supposed to be loud at this hour. Rolling suitcases, impatient travelers, boarding announcements echoing off the high glass ceilings. But the moment Shadow leapt onto the baggage conveyor and sank his teeth into the side of a red suitcase, the world snapped into a strange, electric silence. The Belgian Malinois hit the conveyor with so much force that the belt rattled under him. Travelers gasped and stumbled back. A mother pulled her child behind her. A businessman dropped his coffee as the dog growled, deep and low, his jaw clamped hard on the corner of the suitcase like he had locked onto something dangerous, something alive. Ethan Cole, Shadow's handler, shouldered through the crowd with a sharp, "Move! Police K9! Make room!" His heart hammered against his ribs as he grabbed Shadow's harness. "Shadow, out! Out!" The command rang out, crisp and practiced. Shadow had responded to that command 1,000 times in training, in drills, even in high-stress searches. But not today. Today, Shadow didn't move a single inch. The dog growled harder, muscles trembling under Ethan's grip, teeth tightening around the rough fabric of the suitcase. His eyes were locked forward, intense, amber, wild. Something about the way he stared at that suitcase chilled Ethan's blood. Shadow wasn't reacting like he did with drugs or explosives. This was different. This was personal. Passengers backed away quickly, forming a wide circle around the baggage carousel. Phones came out, cameras flipped open. A few people whispered. A few prayed under their breath. Someone said they thought they saw the suitcase twitch. Ethan swallowed. "Shadow, buddy. Talk to me." He tugged the harness again, gently this time, but Shadow only lowered himself, bracing as if preparing for a fight. The conveyor belt hummed beneath him, dragging the suitcase forward inch by inch. Yet Shadow refused to let go. A young airport worker jogged up, breathless. "Sir, is that supposed to happen?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "Absolutely not." The red suitcase jerked sideways with Shadow's weight, scraping along the metal rails of the conveyor. A few travelers screamed and jumped back again, raising the tension another notch. A TSA officer reached for the emergency stop switch, but Ethan thrust out a hand. "Don't touch that," he warned. "If this is what I think it is, sudden movement could trigger something." The officer froze. Shadow snapped his head, teeth grinding deeper into the suitcase. His tail had dropped, fur along his spine standing like sharp quills. No bark, no warning signal, just a deep, instinctive growl that reverberated through the hall. "Shadow, out!" Ethan ordered again, louder now. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. Someone yelled that the dog was malfunctioning. A man at the back of the crowd shouted something about calling airport security. Before Ethan could respond, the suitcase shifted again. Just a tiny thud, but enough. A sound that didn't belong to metal or wheels or bouncing shampoo bottles. A sound like a scrape, a scratch. Ethan froze. His breath caught in his throat. The sound had been faint, barely there, but Shadow reacted instantly. His body tightened, his ears pinned forward, his growl deepened into something primal, something protective. "Oh God," a woman whispered behind Ethan. Was that from inside the bag? Phones lifted higher now. People held their breaths. Some stared with wide, frightened eyes, as if the suitcase might explode at any second. Others raised their cameras like they were witnessing a crime drama unfold before them. A little boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, is the dog gonna blow up the airport?" Ethan's stomach clenched. "Nobody's blowing anything up," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He desperately scanned the crowd for backup, and that's when Captain Julia Grant stormed in. Her boots hit the floor with authority. She wore her dark blue uniform like armor, shoulders square, jaw locked tight. Grant didn't tolerate mistakes, especially not in her terminal. She took one look at the chaotic scene. Shadow on the conveyor, the torn suitcase, the frozen crowd, and her face hardened. "What the hell is going on here, Officer Cole?" "Shadow reacted to this suitcase," Ethan said. "He's never behaved like this before." Grant raised a brow. "You let your dog bite a passenger's luggage?" "He didn't let anything," a traveler muttered. "The dog just went off." Grant shot the man a look sharp enough to shut him up before turning back to Ethan. "I need you to get that dog off the belt. Now." Ethan inhaled. "Ma'am, listen to him. Something's wrong." Before she could argue, the suitcase trembled again, this time louder, a scraping sound like nails on hard plastic. Someone screamed. Another person dropped a suitcase and bolted. A wave of panic rippled outward, people stumbling back, shoes squeaking, breath hitching as they tried to decide if they should run for the exits. Grant's eyes widened for a split second, just enough for Ethan to see fear flash through her calm exterior. "What was that?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know." Shadow suddenly released his bite, not because the danger passed, but because he repositioned himself in front of the suitcase, planting his paws firmly on the conveyor belt. He leaned in, body hunched over the bag as though shielding it, or guarding something fragile inside. A different kind of silence fell over the baggage hall, a heavy, paralyzing silence. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant whine of jet engines far out on the runway. But in the heart of the terminal, dozens of people stood absolutely still, watching, waiting. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Shadow, what are you trying to tell? Me?" Grant exhaled sharply, snapping back into command mode. "Clear half the terminal. No one leaves this area, and get bomb squad en route now." Officers sprinted into action, pushing back stunned travelers and rolling out barriers. A few people objected, but they were drowned out by orders barked over radios and the rising buzz of fear. Ethan crouched beside Shadow, placing a steadying hand on the dog's shoulder. Shadow didn't look at him, didn't blink. His gaze stayed locked on the trembling suitcase, nostrils flaring, chest vibrating with a soft, distressed whine. It wasn't aggression now, it was concern. Fear for whatever was inside that bag. Ethan's voice tightened. "Grant, something's alive in there." Grant stared, her expression unreadable. And for a moment, just one brief, breathless moment, the entire airport seemed to hold its breath. Even the news screens on the walls flickered into silence. Ethan glanced at the frightened faces around him, elderly travelers clutching their palms, a couple frozen mid-step, a teenage boy whispering to his sister. Alex Kim, the vlogger, live-streaming in stunned silence as his chat exploded. Everything felt suspended, everything except Shadow. The dog stayed perfectly still, guarding that suitcase like it held the last beating heart in the world. Ethan swallowed hard, then looked directly into the nearest camera. Alex's livestream pointed right at him. If these stories touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Paws of Courage. Every click helps us share more tales of courage, compassion, and the incredible bonds that change lives. One dog, one human, one story at a time. The suitcase trembled again, harder this time. Passengers gasped, Shadow growled, and the entire airport went silent. 4 hours before Shadow's teeth clamped onto that red suitcase, Terminal C at Dallas-Fort Worth looked like any other morning, sunlight pouring through glass walls, polished floors gleaming, and travelers dragging their sleep-heavy bodies toward early flights. No one imagined the same hall would later grind to a terrified silence. Not Ethan. Not his rookie partner, and certainly not Shadow. Ethan Cole stood near the TSA checkpoint with a cup of burnt airport coffee in one hand and Shadow's leash in the other. The Belgian Malinois sat calmly at his side, ears perked, eyes alert, tail still, a picture of discipline. If anyone saw him now, they'd never believe that within hours he'd bring an entire international terminal to a halt. "Morning patrol," Ethan murmured, scratching behind Shadow's ear. "Let's make it a peaceful one today." Shadow blinked slowly, leaning into the touch. Peaceful mornings were rare blessings in airport security, but Ethan hoped for one anyway. After 12 years on the job, and the last 5 paired with Shadow, he knew to appreciate the quiet moments. "Officer Cole," a bright voice called. Ethan turned as rookie Mia Torres jogged toward him, adjusting her badge as she tried to keep her ponytail from whipping her eyes. Fresh out of academy, full of confidence and with a tendency to talk too fast, Mia had been assigned to shadow him in shadow for the week. She meant well, though she was still young enough to think protocol was always perfect and instincts were optional. "You ready for another thrilling day of luggage inspections?" she asked with a grin. Ethan chuckled. "You'll miss these days when real trouble hits." "Trouble," Mia scoffed as she crouched to scratch Shadow's chin. "Shadow here won't let anything slip by, right, buddy?" The dog sniffed her hand, then looked away with dignified disinterest. Mia laughed. "Still not a fan of me. One day he'll realize I'm adorable." "He realizes," Ethan said. "He just doesn't care." "Story of my life," she muttered. The three moved into the main terminal, blending into the early morning bustle. Families wrangled kids, business travelers marched briskly, and sleepy college students clutched backpacks like life preservers. The smell of breakfast burritos floated from a nearby cafe. A janitor whistled a country tune as he wiped down the railings. Just ordinary airport chaos. Shadow walked slightly ahead, nose working the air, tail held low, but steady. Ethan watched the dog's posture carefully. Shadow's body language had saved lives before. He had a knack for noticing what humans missed. Ethan didn't understand it fully, but he trusted it. They approached the baggage claim area just as passengers from a flight out of Sao Paulo began to trickle in. The conveyor belts clanged to life, suitcases sliding out in uneven waves. Shadow paused. Not dramatically. No growl, no sudden change. Just a mild hesitation, a tilt of the head toward the luggage sliding onto the belt. Ethan noticed instantly. "You smell something, boy?" he asked softly. Shadow took a single step toward the carousel, but then, just as quickly, looked away. Whatever it was, he didn't engage further. He simply resumed his patrol pace. Ethan filed it away in his mind. Shadow didn't hesitate without reason, but sometimes the reason wasn't dangerous. An unusual scent, a foreign food, a nervous traveler. Mia, however, laughed. "Probably someone brought strong cheese. I swear those flights from Brazil always have food that could knock me out from 50 feet. Shadow kept walking, but Ethan could see a faint stiffness in the dog's shoulders that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Before he could ponder more, a voice interrupted. "Yo, that's the famous dog, right?" A young man holding a small camera rig approached them. He wore a denim jacket, a beanie, and a wide smile. Ethan recognized him, Alex Kim, a travel vlogger who roamed airports like they were his natural habitat. Half the TSA staff followed his channel. Ethan sighed inwardly. "Morning, Alex." "Man, I can't believe I ran into you guys again," Alex said, pointing his camera toward Shadow. "Shadow, airport legend. I swear my viewers love him more than I do." Mia brightened. "I watch your channel. My niece is obsessed with your airport horror stories series." Alex's eyes gleamed. "Great, and who knows? Maybe I'll get another story today." He winked at the camera. "But hopefully not too horrifying." Ethan offered a polite smile but kept moving. Cameras made everything harder. People acted differently once they knew they were being recorded, and situations escalated faster than they should. Still, Alex trailed behind at a respectful distance, live streaming his commentary as they patrolled. Shadow abruptly stopped again. This time, Mia noticed. "You see that?" Ethan followed Shadow's gaze. A man in a gray hoodie stood near the carousel, hands tucked deep into his pockets. His posture was stiff, head down, eyes darting from suitcase to suitcase. He wasn't grabbing any luggage, he wasn't meeting anyone, just watching. Too closely. Ethan's instincts twitched. Shadow heal. But Shadow didn't heal. He stayed locked onto the man. After a tense half-second, the hoodie man turned and walked away, quickly. Not enough to sprint, but enough to raise suspicion. Mia frowned. "Should we follow him?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "Could be nothing." But Shadow watched the man disappear into the crowd, ears raised, body taut. A sign the dog had filed, that scent, that posture, that person, somewhere deep in the back of his mind. Shadow rarely forgot. They continued along the carousel, checking bags, interacting with staff, weaving through clusters of travelers. The red suitcase, later the centerpiece of chaos, had already looped the carousel once without notice. It spun by again, steady and unremarkable. But on the third pass, Shadow froze. Just for a breath. Ethan felt the leash tighten. Shadow leaned forward, nostrils flaring, eyes narrowing. No growl yet, no bark, just alertness sharpened like a blade. Mia looked from Shadow to Ethan. "That look, that's different." "It is," Ethan murmured. "Trust me." Shadow stepped once toward the conveyor, then twice. Then, unexpectedly, he backed away, almost like he wasn't sure, almost like he needed to confirm something first. Ethan's pulse flickered. He knew that behavior. He'd seen it exactly twice before, and both times the consequences had been deadly serious. But before he could process it, the terminal speakers blared an arrival announcement, and a wave of passengers swept between them and the red suitcase. Shadow's moment of stillness passed. The dog resumed walking, though his head kept turning back toward the carousel, toward the suitcase, toward whatever he had sensed inside it. The morning remained peaceful, but Ethan felt a disturbance settle into his bones. A quiet warning, a whisper of danger carried not by alarms or scanners, but by shadows. Hesitation. He brushed it off. They all did. They continued their patrol, smiled at travelers, greeted staff. Shadow sniffed dozens of bags and brushed past hundreds of people. And no one, not Ethan, not Mia, not the vlogger streaming to thousands, had the faintest idea that the quiet morning was counting down to disaster. 4 hours later, Shadow would leap onto that conveyor and clamp his teeth into the red suitcase, and the entire airport would fall silent. By the time the sun climbed higher above the Dallas-Fort Worth skyline, the airport had settled into its familiar rhythm, rolling luggage, murmuring voices, and the constant hum of people trying to get somewhere. No one in Terminal C sensed the storm forming quietly beneath the surface. No one except Shadow. Ethan walked alongside the Malinois as they continued their patrol along the baggage area. The crowd from the São Paulo flight had thickened, and more luggage was beginning to spill out into the carousel. Mia trailed slightly behind, jotting notes on her small pad the way rookies do when they're trying to impress without appearing over-eager. Shadow moved with the smooth confidence of a seasoned working dog, but Ethan saw the subtle changes. Tiny shifts in posture, a pause in his breathing, the faint twitch of an ear. Shadow was picking up something. Not enough to trigger a full reaction yet, but enough to make a seasoned handler sharpen his senses. The red suitcase appeared again on the belt, the one that had looped earlier without attracting much attention. It rolled along the curve of the carousel, bumping lightly against other bags. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. Yet Shadow's head turned. Slowly, deliberately, his nostrils flared. Ethan tightened his grip on the leash. "You got something?" Shadow didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He didn't make a sound. He simply watched the suitcase pass by as though studying it, as though filing its scent into some quiet corner of his mind. Mia stepped up beside him. He's acting weird again. Maybe it's someone's lunch. No, Ethan murmured. That's not a food response. Perfume? She offered. No, Mia frowned. So what is it? I don't know. Ethan looked down at the dog. But he does. Shadow broke his stare and continued walking, though he cast a backward glance toward the carousel. Ethan felt a small knot tighten in his stomach. He had spent years learning the language Shadow spoke, subtle things most people never saw, and Shadow rarely second-guessed. When he hesitated, it meant the danger was unfamiliar, undefined. That alone made Ethan uneasy. As they moved back into the flow of travelers, a young woman hurried toward the carousel with a concerned expression etched across her face. Her voice cracked slightly as she approached an airport attendant. Excuse me, sir. Have you seen a red suitcase? Medium size, kind of wine-colored? My sister was on the flight from Sao Paulo. She should have met me, but she hasn't come out yet. Ethan's ears perked up. That's the one we keep seeing, Mia whispered. Shadow paused again, this time turning toward the woman. Ethan approached her. Ma'am, you said your sister hasn't shown up. She nodded anxiously. Her plane landed half an hour ago. She texted me before takeoff, but I haven't heard anything since. Shadow sniffed the air, then moved closer to the woman's duffel bag. Not in a reactive way, more like searching for something familiar. The woman noticed. Is something wrong? She asked. Ethan gave a reassuring nod. We're just making sure everything's okay. But his eyes drifted to the carousel where the red suitcase had vanished behind a stack of other luggage. It would be back around soon. Meanwhile, Alex Kim, the travel vlogger, had lingered at a respectful distance. He zoomed his camera slightly, catching Shadow's strange behavior. The chat on his live stream scrolled rapidly. Viewers speculated, joked, or asked him to move closer. Alex hesitated, then stepped forward. Officer Cole? Mind if I… Stay back, Alex, Ethan said firmly, but not unkindly. I don't want this blowing up into something it isn't. Of course, Alex said, lowering the camera. But his viewers had already noticed Shadow's odd shifts in behavior, and Alex couldn't deny a tingle of curiosity. Shadow suddenly stopped again. Not because of the woman, not because of Alex, but because the conveyor belt creaked and the red suitcase returned into view. This time, Shadow didn't hesitate. His body straightened. His ears pinned forward, his pupils narrowed, and his breath quickened, not in fear, but in a tightly wound alertness Ethan had only seen a handful of times in his career. Okay, Ethan whispered. Something's happening. The suitcase traveled along the curve of the carousel, sliding through a cluster of brightly colored bags. Shadow leaned forward on the leash, but only an inch. His muscles quivered. He inhaled the air with deep, measured precision. Then he stiffened. A faint whine escaped his throat. Mia's eyes widened. He's never done that before. Ethan swallowed. Shadow's reaction was new, not aggressive, not territorial. It was worried, protective. That scared Ethan more than any growl could have. The belt turned. The suitcase drew closer. Travelers gathered around the carousel leaned in, oblivious to the tension cresting only a few feet behind them. A toddler tugged on his mother's shirt. "Mommy, that dog is looking at the bags." The woman glanced over and instinctively pulled her child closer. "Let's stand back a little, honey." Shadow's breathing changed, shorter, sharper. Ethan felt the dog's heart beat through the leash. Then, in a sudden shift, Shadow turned his head and looked toward the open walkway on the other side of the carousel. His gaze locked onto something, or someone. Ethan followed his line of sight, the man in the gray hoodie. He was back, standing partially hidden behind a pillar, watching the carousel with a stiff, calculated intensity. The moment the man realized Shadow had spotted him, he jerked his head away and strode off into the crowd. "Suspicious," Mia whispered. "Very suspicious." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. But Shadow's more worried about the suitcase than the man. That's even worse, Mia replied. Alex shifted on his heels, watching them carefully. Is this something dangerous? Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, not yet. The red suitcase was almost in front of them again. Shadow's body trembled with anticipation. His paws dug subtly into the tile. His tail stiffened. A soft rumble vibrated in his throat. Ethan leaned down. Easy, boy. Easy. Mia stepped back. The young woman, looking for her sister, clutched her duffel bag tighter. A group of older travelers froze mid-conversation, sensing something was off. And then, it happened. The suitcase hit a slight bump on the belt, and Shadow reacted. Not with a bark, not with a growl, but with a sudden, guttural noise Ethan had never heard from him, a distressed sound, a warning wrapped in anguish. The travelers closest to the carousel jumped back. Someone screamed. Another person grabbed their spouse's arm. What was that? Mia whispered. Shadow moved another inch toward the conveyor. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He whispered, almost to himself, something's alive in there. But no one heard him, because just then, the red suitcase thumped. From the inside, a sound so faint it could have been imagined, but so out of place it sucked the noise out of the air. A scratching sound followed, quick, trembling, like something sliding or clawing inside a confined space. Travelers froze. Mia covered her mouth. Alex lowered his camera, stunned. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. Oh God, my sister. Shadow let out a low, tormented whine and pressed forward, needing to be closer. Ethan grabbed the harness to hold him back. People stepped away from the carousel in fear, forming a widening ring of uncertainty. What's in that bag? A man asked shakily. Ethan answered honestly. I don't know. Shadow's muscles bunched, preparing for something no one else could see coming. In the next hour, chaos would erupt, but right now, in this small moment, with fear rippling across the hall and a dog's instinct screaming louder than any alarm, one truth settled over everyone present. Whatever was inside that red suitcase, it wasn't supposed to be there. The scratching inside the red suitcase was faint, weak, but undeniable. It was a sound that didn't belong in an airport, didn't belong in any suitcase. Conversations died mid-sentence. The carousel continued its steady rotation, but no one stepped forward to grab their luggage. Instead, travelers slowly backed away, forming a trembling ring around the conveyor belt as Shadow locked his stance and focused on the suitcase as if it were a living threat. Ethan could feel the tension in Shadow's body, tight as a drawn bowstring. The dog wasn't behaving like this was an explosive. He was behaving like something inside that bag needed him, something alive, something afraid. Ethan, Mia whispered, her voice small. That wasn't normal. None of this is normal. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy watching Shadow's every muscle. The dog's instincts had never once failed him, never once led him wrong. And now those instincts were screaming. The suitcase rolled closer, and Shadow snapped. With a burst of power, the Malinois lunged up onto the conveyor belt, claws scraping against the rubber, teeth flashing. Travelers shrieked and stumbled back. Phones shot up like a field of metallic flowers, capturing every second. Shadow, no! Ethan yelled, but it was too late. Shadow clamped down on the suitcase with a force that jolted the entire carousel. The belt groaned under the sudden weight imbalance. Bags behind the red suitcase jammed and began piling up. Alarms triggered overhead, chiming a harsh metallic warning as the system froze. A baggage handler shouted, "Hey, you can't let him do that!" Mia stepped in front of the man. "Stay back!" Shadow refused to release the suitcase, dragging it several inches off the belt. His body shook not from fear, but from determination. The sound inside the luggage made him clamp down even harder. Ethan climbed onto the edge of the conveyor belt and grabbed Shadow's harness with both hands. "Shadow, out! Out!" But the dog held firm. Every command bounced off him like stones on steel. Behind them, footsteps thundered across the terminal floor. Captain Julia Grant arrived with 3 airport security officers in tow, fury already glowing behind her eyes. "Officer Cole, what in God's name are you doing?" Ethan didn't look at her. "Shadow's reacting to something inside this bag, Captain. Something alive." "Alive?" Grant scoffed. "This is why protocols exist, so officers don't go attacking passenger property." "Captain, listen," Mia said urgently. "Something moved inside that suitcase. We all heard it." Grant opened her mouth with a retort, ready to shut them both down, but then the suitcase twitched again. The movement was unmistakable. Soft, but deliberate. A little thump, a trembling bump, a scrape. "What was that?" Grant whispered. Shadow growled deep in his chest, shifting his grip to protect a corner of the suitcase that had begun to bulge outward. The dog pressed his chest against the case as though using his body weight to keep something inside from pushing through. The passengers gasped. One woman covered her face. The young woman searching for her sister nearly collapsed to her knees. Grant's authority faltered. "Okay, get me bomb squad. Now." One of her officers sprinted off. Ethan kept his voice low, steady. "Captain, if this is a bomb, and I don't think it is, it's reacting to something alive inside. We need to be careful." Before anyone could say another word, a loud metallic crack echoed through the hall. The suitcase's old hinges strained under Shadow's weight. The crowd jumped back again. The conveyor belt, frozen mid-cycle, emitted a grinding whine as the backup of bags pushed against the jam. Shadow didn't budge. He was guarding, not attacking. Mia stepped closer to the captain. "He's not treating it like an explosive. He's treating it like someone's inside." Grant's expression shifted. Not fear, responsibility. She gave a sharp nod. "Lock down sectors C and D, move all passengers back 50 feet, and clear a path for bomb squad." Her officers rushed to obey. Ethan kept pulling at Shadow. "Come on, buddy, let go." Shadow shifted his stance, widened his paws, and planted himself more firmly. Then came the moment that shattered everything. A faint cry, not mechanical, not metallic. A soft, quivering whimper, low, desperate, inhuman, but alive. The sound brushed across the hall like a cold wind. Every person, every traveler, attendant, officer, froze. "What was that?" Mia breathed. "Oh, dear God," whispered a man at the back of the crowd. Ethan's heart seemed to stop. His breath caught in his chest. The cry came again, muffled by layers of fabric, but filled with unmistakable fear. Shadow's growl instantly melted into a low, grieving whine. He lowered his head and pressed his muzzle gently against the bulging corner of the suitcase, as if comforting whatever was trapped inside. The terminal fell completely silent. Even the jet engines outside seemed to pause. Bomb squad arrived moments later, helmeted, armored, carrying their equipment with the rigid precision of trained specialists. Their leader stepped forward. "Step aside," he ordered. Shadow snarled, not aggressively, but protectively. He placed himself squarely between the suitcase and the technician. Ethan raised his hands. "He's guarding it. You'll need to move slowly." Grant nodded. "Nobody spooks that dog. Am I clear?" The technician crouched slowly, lifting a handheld scanner. He ran it over the suitcase, expecting to see metal signals, explosive residue, chemical signatures, anything typical. The screen flickered. White. Blank. Then, a single orange dot pulsed on the display. "Thermal reading," the technician murmured. "Small. Rapid. Moving." Grant's face paled. "Moving?" Shadow whined again, nudging the suitcase as if urging them to hurry. Then the technician froze as the dot on his scanner pulse grew brighter. "Captain," he whispered, This thing is alive." Before the words even settled in the room, the suitcase jolted sharply, a stronger movement than before. A little thud, a scrape, a push. Passengers screamed and scattered. The officers formed a barrier. Grant drew her weapon. Mia stepped behind Ethan, heart pounding, but Ethan focused on Shadow. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "We'll get it out." Shadow pressed his paw against the suitcase, breathing fast, body trembling not from aggression, but from distress. He knew. He understood something terrible was happening inside that confined space. Something suffering, something fighting for life. The technician swallowed hard. "Captain, whatever's in there won't last long. We need to get it out. Now." Grant exhaled slowly. "Then do it." Ethan steadied Shadow, whispering reassurances. Mia moved to help. As the technician reached for the latch on the suitcase's corner, the crowd held its breath. The noise of the airport faded away. All that remained was a trembling suitcase, a dog refusing to step aside, and a single truth rising like a storm. Whatever lived inside that bag was running out of time. The technician's gloved fingers hovered over the battered latch of the red suitcase, trembling just slightly. No one breathed. No one spoke. Even the hum of the conveyor belt felt softer, as though the entire terminal understood the weight of the moment. A whimper rose again from inside the suitcase. Thin, wavering, exhausted. Shadow let out a quiet, throaty cry of his own and pressed closer, bracing his body as if shielding the case from unseen danger. Ethan kept one hand on the dog's harness, feeling Shadow's heartbeat thudding fast and hard beneath his fur. "Slow," Ethan whispered to the technician. "Let him adjust to what you're doing. He's telling you there's something fragile in there." The technician nodded without lifting his eyes. "I won't spook him." Behind them, Captain Grant stood stiff as a rod, weapon drawn but angled downward. Her voice was low, tight. "Crowd secure. Terminals C and D are sealed. Bomb squad is in position. Move carefully, people." Even Mia had gone quiet. She hovered near Ethan's shoulder, hands clasped together, eyes flicking between Shadow, the suitcase, and the technician, as if she expected something monstrous to burst out at any moment. The technician slowly lifted a compact scanning wand from his kit. He powered it on, and a soft blue glow washed over the red suitcase. The screen in his other hand flickered like an old television trying to catch signal. "What's it saying?" Grant asked. He shook his head. "The readings are unstable. It's registering heat, irregular heat, but I'm not picking up any metals or chemical traces consistent with explosives." "So not a bomb?" Mia asked. "Not a conventional one," he answered carefully. "But something's generating body heat. Something small, and it's moving in short bursts, like breathing." The word breathing hit the air like a cold splash of water. The travelers standing at the far end of the hall murmured anxiously. A couple held hands. A teenager wiped tears with the sleeve of her hoodie. Everyone was terrified, but more than that, they were horrified by the idea that something living might be inside a suitcase with so little air, so little space, so little hope. Shadow pressed his paw onto the metal frame of the conveyor belt, leaning toward the suitcase with a soft, rhythmic whine. Ethan had never seen the dog this distressed. He wasn't reacting like he would to danger. He was reacting like he did the day he found a child trapped under rubble after a building collapse. Worried, desperate, pleading. "Something's wrong in there," Ethan murmured. "He feels it." Grant swallowed. "All right, Technician Ramirez. You open it, slowly." Ramirez took a sharp breath and edged closer. The wand beeped steadily now, the pulsing dot on his display deepening into a warm orange glow. Something alive, something weakening. He reached for the latch again, but the moment metal clicked softly under his fingers, the suitcase jerked violently from the inside. Shadow snarled, not in aggression, but in panic. Ethan tightened his grip on the dog. Easy. Stay with me. Ramirez jerked his hand back. It's moving again. Mia's voice cracked. Whatever's in there, it's scared out of its mind. Grant raised her free hand. Nobody rush this. Ramirez, try again. Ramirez inhaled deeply, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, and reached for the latch a third time. The terminal was so silent that the faint scrape of metal against metal echoed. Click. The latch slid free. Shadow leaned so far forward that Ethan had to brace himself. A soft exhale rippled through the gathered officers. The second latch released with another sharp, metallic pop. Ramirez placed both hands on the edges of the suitcase lid. Opening in 3, 2, 1. Wait, Ethan whispered. Everyone froze. Shadow had stiffened, not with fear, but with a strange, solemn stillness. His ears pinned back and he nudged the suitcase with the tip of his nose as if telling them to be gentle. Very gentle. Ramirez nodded at Ethan with understanding. The suitcase opened an inch, just enough for warm air to escape. Warm air and a soft, trembling wheeze. Ramirez slowly lifted the lid the rest of the way. Light spilled over the contents inside, revealing a bundle wrapped in layers of clothing. Scarves, sweaters, soft fabrics crumpled together into a crude nest. Something inside the bundle shifted. Then a tiny paw emerged, grayish-white fur, trembling violently. A small, fragile body curled into itself, a creature somewhere between fear and collapse. Cub, Mia whispered. Is that? Ramirez gently peeled back the last layer of fabric. Everyone gasped at once. Curled in the center of the suitcase lay a snow leopard cub, no bigger than a house cat, its fur matted with sweat, its breaths ragged and weak. Its pale blue eyes fluttered, half open, unfocused, as though it hadn't seen daylight in hours. Shadow whimpered softly and lowered his head beside the open suitcase, inching forward until his nose brushed the cub's paw. The tiny creature stirred weakly, too exhausted to respond, but not too far gone to sense kindness. A few travelers sobbed quietly. Someone whispered, "That poor thing." Grant's face, usually carved from stone, softened with something like heartbreak. "Who would do this?" she murmured. But Ramirez wasn't done. "Captain, I think there's more." He carefully lifted the small, trembling cub out and passed it to Mia, who cradled it with shaking hands. Shadow sniffed the air urgently, watching as Mia moved the cub to safety. Ramirez then reached into the suitcase again and pulled up the fabric lining, and the bottom dropped out of the room. Beneath the lining was a second compartment, a false bottom containing sealed vials, packets of strange gel-like substances, and a small black electronic device blinking faintly. Grant stepped forward. "What in God's name?" Ramirez examined the vials. "These aren't drugs. They're something different. Something engineered." Ethan felt dread crawl up his spine. "Engineered how?" "Biotech materials," Ramirez said quietly. "This looks like genetic compounds, tissue samples, some sort of chemical substrate." Mia tightened her arms around the cub. "They used him as cover. They hid all this under him." Grant swore under her breath. "Smuggling. High-grade biological smuggling." "It's worse," Ramirez added. "This device here," he lifted the blinking transmitter, "is active. It's sending a signal out. Someone is tracking this suitcase." Ethan felt Shadow stiffen beside him. And then the Malinois looked up toward the far exit of Terminal C. His ears rose. His body straightened. His growl started deep and low. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. Shadow's gaze locked onto something beyond the barricades. Someone watching. Someone who had just realized their precious cargo had been found. Grant snapped into action. "Ramirez, secure those samples. Officers, freeze every exit. If that signal is active, the handler is still in this terminal." Shadow barked, sharp, fierce, determined. And in that single bark, the silence of Terminal C shattered into chaos. For a long moment, no one moved. The snow leopard cub lay trembling in Mia's arms, its tiny breaths fragile and uneven. Shadow stayed close, nose brushing the edge of the blanket Mia had wrapped around the cub, his whine low and gentle. Nothing like the fierce growls he'd shown moments earlier. It was as if he was trying to soothe the creature, to tell it the danger had passed, but it hadn't. Not even close. Ramirez crouched once more beside the open suitcase, shining a small pen light into the false bottom where the vials and the blinking transmitter sat. "Captain," he said, quietly, "I don't think this is just smuggling. These materials, they're organized, insulated, and coded. Someone wanted them kept at precise temperature and humidity. This isn't amateur work." Grant knelt beside him, her expression tightening. "What am I looking at, Ramirez?" He lifted one of the vials. Inside, a clear fluid glimmered faintly with suspended crystalline particles. Nothing like any drug they had ever seized. "High-concentration gene substrate," Ramirez said. "This stuff doesn't show up on scanners because it's technically organic, non-metallic, non-chemical based, designed to slip through traditional detection." Mia's eyes widened. "So they hid all this under a baby animal? To avoid suspicion?" Ramirez nodded grimly. "Organic scent masks, organic cargo. The cub was part of the plan." Ethan swallowed hard. Whoever packed this wasn't trying to move drugs. They were moving something far more dangerous. Grant stood, her jaw clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. "Ramirez, secure every piece of that evidence. I want it sealed in a biohazard-equipped carrier right now and get federal bioresponse on standby." As Ramirez began sorting and sealing the vials, Shadow stepped closer to Mia, sniffing the weak cub again. The animal lifted a trembling paw toward him, barely conscious. The gesture was small, but it hit everyone in the circle like a blow to the chest. A few passengers watching from behind barricades wiped their eyes. One whispered, "That poor thing." Another muttered, "This world has gone insane." Ethan crouched and placed a hand on Shadow's neck. "You did good, boy. You found him." Shadow leaned into the touch but kept his gaze sharp, ears pivoting. He wasn't done. He knew there was more. And then Ramirez froze. His hand hovered above the false bottom as he brushed aside one final layer of fabric. "Captain, you need to see this." Grant stepped in. "What now?" Ramirez lifted a small plastic sheet from the bottommost compartment, neatly folded, sealed, and labeled in block handwriting. "Biosubject, vital records, do not discard." Inside were several thin tubes filled with microchips suspended in a viscous gel. Beneath them, a small device with a blinking green light pulsed steadily. "That's another transmitter?" Mia asked. "Worse," Ramirez whispered. "This one's reading vitals." Grant's eyes narrowed. "Vitals of what?" Ramirez glanced at the cub. "Of him." A collective shudder rippled through the group. "They weren't transporting him," Ramirez continued grimly. "They were monitoring him, testing how long he could survive inside confinement, tracking real-time biological stress data." Mia clutched the cub closer, horrified. "They used him as an experiment." Ramirez nodded. "A living data container." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "This is more than smuggling. This is research, illegal, dangerous, organized." Grant let out a slow exhale. "Looks like we just uncovered a biotech smuggling operation." But before anyone could process more, Shadow suddenly stiffened. Every hair along his back rose. His ears shot up. He stared, not at the suitcase, not at the cub, but across the terminal. Ethan followed his line of sight. A figure stood near the sliding doors of the restricted exit corridor, half hidden in the shadows. The same gray hoodie from earlier. The man had returned, and he wasn't watching the suitcase anymore. He was watching them, The moment he realized Shadow had spotted him, he turned sharply and bolted. "There!" Ethan shouted. "He's running!" Grant reacted instantly. "All units, pursue! No one gets through that corridor." Officers scrambled. Radios erupted with overlapping voices. "Suspect heading northbound. Gray hoodie, male, mid-30s. He's moving fast. Lock all exits." But Shadow was already ahead of them. He let out a sharp bark, one Ethan recognized as a pursuit call, and lunged forward. Ethan barely had time to grip the leash before the Malinois pulled him into a sprint. "Shadow, go! Track him!" Ethan yelled, releasing the quick-release clasp. Shadow launched forward like a bullet. His paws hammered the polished floor, claws clicking with speed as he tore through the terminal. Travelers jumped aside, officers pressed against walls. Mia held the cub tightly and shouted after Ethan, "Be careful!" Grant sprinted behind them. "Cut him off at the service hallway. Lock down the tram access." The hoodie man shoved past a group of workers, knocking over a rolling trash bin. He darted toward the employee-only double doors, slamming his shoulder against them until the lock gave way. Shadow hit the gap milliseconds after him, plunging into the dim corridor with Ethan right on his heels. "Shadow, hold!" Ethan shouted as they veered into the long, echoing hallway. The suspect glanced back, panic twisting his features. He stumbled, regained his footing, and sprinted harder, but Shadow was closing the gap fast. Grant's voice cracked through Ethan's radio. "We've shut down the east exits. He has nowhere to go." The hallway opened into a loading area stacked with crates and equipment. The suspect scrambled over a pallet jack, nearly tripping. Shadow leapt cleanly, minimal effort, eyes locked on his target. Ethan felt adrenaline burn through his veins. "Shadow, take him!" The Malinois surged forward, muscles coiling, intent razor-sharp. The suspect reached for a metal door leading outside, but his hand barely brushed the handle before Shadow collided with him, hard. The man crashed to the ground, air punched from his lungs, yelling in shock. Shadow latched onto his sleeve, holding, not biting, pinning him safely but firmly. Ethan rushed in, grabbing the man's wrists, yanking them behind his back. "You picked the wrong flight," Ethan growled. Grant arrived seconds later, officers in tow. "Secure him!" As they cuffed the suspect, the man spat out, trembling. "You don't understand. You don't know what they're doing." Grant crouched. "Then enlighten us." He glared, jaw tight. The cub wasn't the payload. It was just a distraction. The real shipment, the real target, is already on its way. You'll never stop them. "Who's they?" Ethan demanded. But the man only smirked darkly. Too late. Shadow growled softly, sensing deceit, danger, and something else Ethan couldn't quite name. Grant stood. "We'll get answers out of him. Take him in." As officers dragged the man away, Ethan knelt beside Shadow, rubbing his fur. "Good boy. You found him." Shadow pressed his forehead into Ethan's chest, breathing hard but steady. They had uncovered one horror. But the suspect's warning echoed down the dim corridor like a cold prophecy. The real shipment is already on its way. And somewhere beyond the terminal walls, something darker was moving. The loading bay still echoed with the suspect's warning long after he'd been hauled off in cuffs. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, the sound sharp against the lingering dread in Ethan's chest. Shadow stood beside him, panting hard from the chase, but alert. Ears high, gaze fixed down the corridor as if expecting someone else to appear. Grant paced back and forth, her boots striking the concrete floor like small detonations. "If he's telling the truth," she said, "then that cub was just one part of a much bigger operation." She turned sharply toward Ramirez, who had caught up with them moments earlier, carrying a sealed case of confiscated vials pressed to his chest. "We need confirmation. How dangerous are these materials?" Ramirez didn't sugarcoat. "Captain, these compounds aren't narcotics. They're engineered. Controlled humidity sensors, thermal stabilizers, microchip tracking. Whoever created them is sophisticated, and these aren't final products. They're prototypes. Grant's jaw tightened. Prototypes for what? Ramirez hesitated. Potentially. Biological alteration, genetic modification, could be medical research, could be weaponized. We need federal labs to run tests. Mia caught up with them, snow leopard cub wrapped snugly in her arms. The little creature whimpered softly, but looked more stable now, its breaths deeper, less panicked. Shadow moved toward the cub and sniffed it gently, reassuring himself that the tiny life he had fought so hard to uncover was still safe. Mia stroked the cub's small head. If this was just a test, Captain, what happens when they ship the real version? Grant said nothing. Her silence was louder than fear. Over the radio, a voice crackled. All exits secured. Terminal sweep in progress. No suspicious packages found. Grant exhaled but didn't calm. If the suspect's right, then we're not looking for a bag. We're looking for a person, someone who knew this suitcase was compromised. Shadow suddenly stiffened again, ears twisting toward the terminal interior. Ethan crouched beside him. What is it, boy? The dog didn't bark this time. He didn't growl. He simply leaned forward, muscles tensed, nose twitching as he inhaled an invisible trail drifting toward the service hall. Shadow pulled, slow at first, then with urgency. Ethan tightened his grip. He's tracking something again. Grant didn't hesitate. Everyone move. Now. They followed Shadow through the service corridor and back into the bright, chaotic world of Terminal C. Officers were sweeping the area, ushering travelers into clear lanes, checking IDs and questioning witnesses. But Shadow ignored all of them. He weaved through the crowd, moving with deliberate purpose. Alex Kim, the vlogger, spotted them pushing through and lifted his camera instinctively. Whoa, Shadow again. What's going on? Did they find something? Back up, Alex, Ethan called over his shoulder. Now's not the time. Shadow pulled harder, dragging Ethan past the barricade and toward the row of airline staff kiosks. Grant followed tightly, signaling her officers to close in. Then Shadow stopped, dead center of the hall, in front of a uniformed employee wearing a navy vest embroidered with the airline's logo, a man they all recognized, Logan Pierce, the same operations supervisor who'd been helping direct officers earlier. The man who had comforted confused passengers, the one who'd been adjusting baggage priority when they first arrived that morning. Logan froze when he realized every pair of eyes had turned on him. Shadow growled, low, unmistakable. Ethan felt his pulse spike. Shadow, heel. The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He focused on one of Logan's sleeves, a sleeve with faint, nearly invisible specks of red dust. Luggage lining dust, from the red suitcase. Grant stepped forward. Mr. Pierce, is there something you'd like to tell us? Logan swallowed but forced a weak smile. Captain Grant, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've been helping your people all morning. Shadow seems to disagree, Grant said coldly. Mia shifted the cub closer, eyes narrowing. Ethan could practically hear her heartbeat. Grant gestured to two officers. Search him. But before they moved, Logan bolted. He didn't hesitate. He swung his elbow into one officer's chest, knocking the wind out of him, and sprinted toward the security exit corridor. Grant shouted, "After him! Don't let him reach airside!" Ethan released Shadow. Take him! Shadow launched forward with explosive speed. The chase ripped through the terminal, Logan weaving between stunned passengers, Shadow weaving faster. Logan shoved aside a luggage cart, but the Malinois leapt over it. He darted past a family, slid under a stanchion bar, and barreled into the restricted hallway with Shadow closing the distance. "Pierce, stop!" Ethan yelled, sprinting behind them. Logan slammed into a metal door marked Employees Only. He swiped his ID badge across the reader. The lock clicked open. Shadow lunged, but the metal door slammed shut just in time. Ethan reached the door seconds later, slamming his palm against it. "He's inside. Stand back," Grant ordered. An officer rushed forward with a bypass override card and swiped it. The door clicked open. Shadow shot inside, with Ethan, Grant, and the others trailing close behind. The hallway beyond was industrial, pipes overhead, concrete walls, the distant rumble of conveyor belts. Logan ran hard, breath ragged, panic finally breaking through his fabric of calm. He reached for a side door leading to the baggage tram access. Shadow pounced, not enough to maul, but enough to knock Logan off balance. The man stumbled, slammed into a crate, and collapsed onto the floor as Shadow stood over him, teeth bared, waiting for Ethan's command. Ethan grabbed Logan's wrists and cuffed him. "You're done running." Logan spat toward the floor. "You don't understand. You think that cub was the danger? You're wrong. You're all wrong." Grant crouched beside him. "Then why don't you educate us?" Logan glared, eyes wild. "That wasn't the payload. It was a test. They're sending samples across the country. That animal, just a cover. You didn't stop anything." "Who's they?" Grant demanded. Logan smirked with a twisted satisfaction. "You'll never stop them." Shadow growled, sensing deceit bubbling under every word. Grant stood. "Get him to interrogation. Now." As officers dragged Logan away, Ethan knelt beside Shadow, stroking the dog's fur. "Good job, partner." Shadow nudged Ethan's chest softly before turning his head toward the sealed case Ramirez carried. The biosamples Logan had helped smuggle. The real horror was just beginning. Because if Logan was telling the truth, there were more shipments, more suitcases, more creatures, or worse, sent through airports across the country. Grant's radio buzzed. "Captain, this is Customs. We've just been alerted. Another suitcase with an active transmitter was flagged at LaGuardia, but there's no animal inside." Grant froze. Ethan's stomach dropped. Shadow stiffened. Mia whispered, "If there's no animal, then what's inside?" No one had an answer, but everyone knew something far more dangerous than a frightened cub. By the time the sun dipped behind the runways and cast long shadows across the terminal walls, the airport felt like a different world. Earlier, panic had pulsed through the place like electricity. Shouts, alarms, sprinting officers. Now, everything was quieter, controlled. The kind of silence that comes after a storm when everyone is too shaken to relax, but too exhausted to panic anymore. Shadow lay beside Ethan in a small briefing room off Terminal C, his head resting on his paws. The Malinois looked tired, physically, emotionally, but alert. Always alert. A hero who knew the battle wasn't over yet. Across the room, Mia sat with the snow leopard cub nestled against a folded blanket. A transport crate, heated, cushioned, and medically prepped, waited just a few feet away for specialized wildlife rescue to arrive. The cub blinked up weakly, but its breathing was steady now. "Safe. You're going to a better place," Mia whispered to it. "A place that won't ever put you in a suitcase again." Ethan watched her, grateful. Mia had proven herself today, not just brave, but compassionate. Shadow seemed to sense it too. He kept glancing over at her and the cub, his tail twitching in small, grateful movements. The door opened, and Captain Grant stepped inside with a federal agent wearing a Homeland Security jacket. Grant's face was pale with stress, but her voice remained firm. "All right," she said. "Let's lay this out." The agent set a stack of printed reports on the desk. "Within the last hour, we've received alerts from New York, Chicago, Denver, and Los Angeles. Multiple suitcases matching the transmitter signature from your case here." Mia stiffened. "Animals inside?" The agent shook his head. "No animals. Just compartments like the false bottom we found here, all containing biochemical substrates. All active." Ethan exhaled slowly. So the cub wasn't the main cargo, it was just the bait, a way to bypass detection. Grant nodded grimly. And a way to distract us from what they were really shipping. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricking as though following every word. Ramirez entered next, holding the sealed case of vials. Preliminary tests confirm the substances are synthetic, he said. Organic-based compounds with embedded microchips. Advanced tech far beyond anything normal criminal groups would have access to. Meaning? Ethan asked. Ramirez hesitated. Meaning this wasn't a smuggling operation for profit. This was a field test. They wanted to know if their materials could move across international borders undetected. Mia shook her head slowly. And they used a baby animal just to hide it. Grant's jaw set in cold fury. People capable of that don't stop at one test. This is organized, international, and now we know they have insiders at major airports. Ethan looked at Shadow. But we also have something they don't. Shadow stared back at him, amber eyes steady and certain. A dog who won't let them get away with this, Ethan said softly. The room fell quiet. No one argued. After a moment, the agent cleared his throat. Officer Cole, Captain Grant. Headquarters is requesting full debrief. Interpol is already pulling files on a biotech black market ring operating in Eastern Europe and parts of South America. We believe your suspect. Logan Pierce is connected. He said we were too late, Mia whispered. You think he was right? Ethan shook his head. Maybe partially. But this... He nodded toward the cub, toward the vials, toward Shadow. This wasn't their victory. They lost a shipment, a handler, a test case, and their anonymity. Grant folded her arms. And they woke a sleeping giant. The federal task force isn't letting this go. Ethan lowered a hand to scratch Shadow's ear. Neither are we. A soft knock tapped against the open door. A wildlife rescue medic stepped in, carrying a portable incubator. We're ready to transfer him, she said gently. Mia rose carefully and carried the cub over. Shadow followed, tail wagging softly, as if escorting the little creature to safety. The medic opened the incubator door and Mia placed the cub inside. The tiny snow leopard gave a faint murmur, barely audible, but Shadow pressed his nose against the glass and the cub pressed its paw back. The medic watched the interaction with awe. He's the reason this little guy lived, isn't he? Yes, Ethan said. He's the reason a lot of people live today. The medic smiled warmly. Then he's one hell of a hero. Shadow blinked, humble and calm, as if such praise meant nothing compared to the job itself. The medic carried the incubator out of the room, Mia following close behind. Ethan watched them go, feeling a strange weight lift from his shoulders. One life saved, one truth revealed, one step into a darkness that could no longer hide. Grant approached him. Cole, Homeland is taking point now, but don't get comfortable. They'll want Shadow on every briefing. He's officially part of the investigation. You hear that, buddy? Ethan said, rubbing Shadow's neck. They want you in the big meetings. Shadow puffed softly through his nose, unimpressed. Grant gave a thin smile. You two did well today, better than well. If Shadow hadn't reacted when he did, we'd be dealing with an international catastrophe right now. Ethan nodded. It wasn't just instinct. He knew something inside that suitcase needed him. Grant's expression softened in a rare, human way. Maybe we ought to learn from that. Before Ethan could respond, her radio crackled again. Captain Grant, urgent. LaGuardia recovered that suitcase. False bottom intact, but it wasn't just compounds inside. Grant snatched the radio. What else was there? A pause. Static. Then the voice. Coordinates. Shipping logs. Something big is coming, and whoever's sending these cases, they're not done. Grant looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Shadow. Shadow rose to his feet. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, He just stood tall, ready, steady, unafraid. "Looks like we're not finished," Ethan murmured. Grant nodded. "No, but thanks to Shadow, we're ahead for the first time." Ethan placed a hand over the dog's chest. "We'll be ready." Outside the briefing room window, the last planes of the night lifted into the sky, engines glowing like stars against the dark horizon. The world moved on. But in one small part of the airport, a dog and his handler understood. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the opening chapter of a much larger one. And Shadow, tired, loyal, unshakably brave, was already listening for the next danger only he could sense.